Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Steve Ward. Andy Mercer and I have been interviewing interesting people in the realm of the paranormal and unknown for half a decade. There's no reason why we can't make it a full decade. Andy Mercer can't be with us tonight, but I have an earth-shattering announcement coming up. Welcome, Susy Bastille. Welcome back.
Hi, Steve. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
I am beyond wonderful. And what I'd like you to do first is let everybody know how to find you and the kind of things you're doing on online, on Facebook, and so forth.
Yep, you can find me on YouTube, the Pukwudgie Whisperer. I also have a blog, pukwudgies.blogspot.com. So, of course, I talk about pukwudgies. I also talk a lot about some ancient stone sites in New England. And on my YouTube channel, we talk about any kind of fake news that needs to be dispelled in the paranormal world, I will say.
So you think there is some fake news out there?
There is definitely horse loads of BS.
Nice way to put it. Coincidentally, we're going to be dealing with that tonight. Should we tell people about the Susy Cam that they can find on your Facebook page?
Yeah, there is. There's actually a Susy Cam compilation on YouTube as well. So when I am out in the swamp looking for pukwudgies or whatever else you can find in the swamp, I have started wearing a cam to get a Susy POV of me traipsing through the swamps of New England.
Wow. Should people take Dramamine before they watch that?
Absolutely. I am a very small person, so it's a little bit rough getting through some of those trails.
It's very good. Bumpy. Okay, without any further ado, I know people are biting their nails and are on the edge of their seat. The announcement I have is that, well, Andy Mercer and I have been doing this for about 5 years. Susy Bastille will also be an equal partner in the High Strangeness Factor. So you can all applaud if you want.
Congratulations.
Thumbs up. That's good.
Thank you very. It is a huge honor to be included with the likes of Steve and Andy.
Well, you know, I used to make a lot of stupid jokes about pay raises and all that sort of thing, but I want you to know I have matured, and I'm not going to do any more stupid pay raise jokes.
You've matured since you did it to me 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. But think of the prestige. You know, you'll be on the street and say, "Hey, I'm a member of the High Strangeness Factor," and they'll say, "What?" So anyway, it'll be a lot of fun. Without any further ado, let me introduce our guests today. If I can just click on the right part here. Okay. Jaci and Biil Kousoulas are phenomenology research professionals, PRP. They are the authors of Bridging the Tragedy, a psychological study based upon the 1967 Silver Bridge disaster in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, Mothman, and post-traumatic growth, a phenomenon that often occurs after tragedy. They are quantitative researchers who seek to understand the connections between psychology, spirituality, and the paranormal by applying the scientific method. Bill's interest in the paranormal began in the late 70s with the original Project UFO television series. In 2003, he was introduced to the Mothman Prophecies movie, and it changed his life. Jaci is a retired postmaster and a current business owner-operator. She specializes in research, data analytics, and connecting the dots between intuition, perception, and reality. She's a first-hand paranormal experiencer, including UFOs, disembodied voices, apparitions, and psychic phenomena. On March 1st, 2024, they embarked upon their next study, which investigates the relationships between trauma and paranormal experiences. Like Bridging the Tragedy, they intend to focus on the positive outcomes that their participants have gained by experiencing these phenomena. If you are interested in participating in the study, they welcome you to contact them. They live in Sycamore, Illinois, 60 miles northwest of Chicago, but closer to cornfields than skyscrapers. Sam Maranto is an investigative researcher, best known for his work on the Tinley Park mass sightings of 2004, the O'Hare Gate C-17 UAP incident of 2006, and others. These mass sightings have been featured in several television programs, such as the History Channel's UFO Hunters episodes, Invasion Illinois, and Aliens at the Airport. Dateline NBC's 10 Best UFO Encounters, and many more. Two other noted investigations were the Lake Cook car incident of 2008 and the Chicago Mothman saga of 2011 to present. Each were featured in popular television shows, documentaries, books, and publications. As a guest on radio and television shows, as well as a requested public speaker, Sam has always made it a point to emphasize the fact that the UFO/UAP phenomena is genuine, yet each account must be evaluated on its own merit. Sam has been a media consultant, MUFON field investigator since 2001, STAR team member, photo analysis, team member, MUFON State Director of Illinois since 2007. His experience with the UFO phenomenon began in October 1959. He delivered his first presentation on the topic in 1967. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the High Strangeness Factor.
Good evening.
So, tonight we're going to talk about, at least we're going to start to talk about the so-called Chicago Mothman phenomenon. Now, when I do shows and so forth, sometimes, mostly at Mothman 101, a lot of that, people will bring up the Chicago Mothman. And a lot of them have no idea of the controversy surrounding it. So any one of you can answer this, or all of you can. What would you tell somebody that has no idea about the history of this these incidents and the sort of questionable sightings of some of them, questionable reports of some of them?
Well, I had the first report that ever came in, and it came into MUFON. And of course, we got bad rapped all the way through because we actually do investigative work on this subject matter because it was a flying object. Now, as far as an encapsulated description, it is a phenomena unto itself because we discovered things, elements to this that were not obvious. Let's put it that way. And this is far more strange than one could ever imagine. There is hoaxing. There is nonsense. There are obviously misidentifications, human things that you would expect. But below this, even those individuals that are obviously trying to hoax or do something unusual like that, there is an element, a theme, or a stream of very unusual correlations and synchronicities that one cannot normally expect to find. I can tell you that we had, of the first in 2011, we had the first sighting on, of course, it would have been August 22nd, and we had to have that come in being August 22nd because that's Bill's birthday, obviously. So that's when, and the funny thing is, these reports, the first two reports came in on October 13th, 2011. Now, 2011, when you think of, and you should know all this quite well, would have been during that time period, would have been the 10th Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant. And it just so happened, who was on the radio that morning and that evening, the day prior, Bill?
Well, the evening that the very first sightings occurred or were reported, or the date that was given and when they were reported, was when Andy Colvin was on Coast to Coast AM the evening before. So it's as if the message was out there and something or somebody responded to it.
Exactly. And the person who what happened is he was coming into town. He lived in the area, and it took place at 63rd and Pulaski. And if anybody knows the location, I know it quite well. I've been past it probably, I don't know, maybe 1,000 times because it was in my neighborhood. And I'd pass it every day going to school. the location had this huge statue of a Native American statue, this big Indian statue. And at the right angle, its thumb appears to be some other appendage. So it became extremely famous. And the guy that came back into town, and he grew up in that neighborhood, but he wanted to take a picture of it. So he takes a photo, unknowing to him that there was something else in that photograph when he got home. When he downloads it, looks at it, he sees this unusual thing that he can't really figure out what the heck it is. It's in the air. And of course, this was the 22nd of August. The 21st of August, mind you, of 2004 was the first mass sighting in Tinley Park. So that may have sprang into his mind if he was following the news on that. But either way, word got out and on this sighting. And by the way, it didn't get reported to until October 13th. Damn, I'm slow today. October 13th was when it was actually reported to MUFON. So that report comes in. Then all of a sudden on another website, another report comes in. And that was apparently two college students, these two young ladies who were running about their apartment, getting ready to go out. And the narrative's pretty hysterical. It sounds like a B movie, wouldn't you say, Bill? And everything except quality details that you would need to get the description of what may be attached to the two red lights, or orange lights and red lights were that looked like eyes peering through their, I think it was third floor windows of a 5-story apartment building, which doesn't exist in that area because there are none. And all of a sudden, they decided they had gotten a call from a boyfriend, one of them. They're screaming. These people are watching a baseball game simultaneously while this is going on, and noticed a large figure, a black figure, a light, mind you, a light into the air, which is the opposite of what a light means, and it takes off. But yet, the funny thing is, they said they were able to see what it was because of the moonlight, and the moonlight being a near full moon. It was 16%, I believe. It wasn't a near full moon, and there was no way that was relevant because it was also raining out. So there was a lot of conflicting data there going on. So right off the bat, when you take a look at these two, and to tell you the truth, the other account I didn't even pay attention to because everything started to spring back into reality in 2007. And unfortunately, people have the dates wrong. Where the first report in 2017, was on April the 7th. In Oz Park. And this is where we'll get into the Oz scenario. And I think you'll find this interesting. Getting back to the August 21st sighting, apparently the sighting that took place that these girls seen, it was just two eyeballs or something, red lights looking at them, supposedly. And that took place on September 30th. That was on a Friday. So that's 39 days in between the two sightings. And then, of course, that event was on the 30th, and the 30th to the 13th is 13 days. If you divide those, of course, you see that they're prime numbers divisible by 13, and it comes out to 3 and 1. Then what happens is the very next day, back, and we're still in 2011. 2011. All of a sudden, another report comes in to this other reporting center, where this individual is taking a break from his studies, and they're out. He's out or she's out, we don't know, with their girlfriend, and gone to the park and this would be near the University of Chicago, where they see this large man with wings flying over, and they thought at first it was somebody on a hang glider. And as it got closer, the person says, it reminded me of a large sugar glider that I would normally have seen back home in Tasmania. Now, when I seen Tasmania, first thing that comes to mind in my mind is Oz, the land of Oz, because it's an island state of Australia. And it struck me as being so unusual when I read that. Now, that was on October the 14th. So we have these correlations or these unusual distancings of and divisible by 13, except for that odd one there. Now, what happens from October the 13th to April the 7th is a span in between of 2002 days between the two. It's very strange. And 2002 is highly significant when it comes to Mothman scenario. Of course, that was the first Mothman festival, and it was also the release of the Mothman prophecies. I found this so interesting that we have these correlations, and here we are in Oz Park in 2017, which of course is the 50-year anniversary of the event of the Mothman festival was celebrating the 50 years of the event, the Silver Bridge collapse, etc. And the event that actually took place, or said to have taken place, in Oz Park. By the way, Oz Park is an interesting park in itself, that it's 13 acres, almost 13.31. And it lies within an area that is an obtuse triangle that is remnant to a gnomon. You know what a gnomon is? On a sundial. It's also a highly significant image in Masonic imagery and symbolism. And it repeats and repeats again, where we have these unusual occurrences. Now, here she is walking through the park, and I'm assuming it was around 7:30, because I'm recalling it, the individual that received the report actually stating that they interviewed this person, who was a corporate attorney of some 10 years and lived nearby, 2 blocks away to be exact. And this would be in the DePaul University area, the northern section. It would be the northern campus. And she's walking through the park, and in the park they have, in the Yellow Brick Road, the park, you have her walking her little terrier dog, and the dog is a Jack Russell Terrier. It's not a Karen Terrier. That was, of course, Toto in the movie, which, by the way, began shooting October the 13th, 1938. I don't know if you knew that. And the funny thing is, the Wizard of Oz appears for shooting. By the way, Frank Morgan, he played 5 parts in The Wizard of Oz. He showed up on October the 14th for the first day of shooting. So here she is. She's walking her dog. By the way, this is the only case where it came in where they actually assigned an anonymous or a fictitious name to the individual. The name they gave to the individual was Tammy. Now, Toto's real name is Terry. What you'd see in the actual report and interview is a very in-depth amount of detail given to how intelligent the dog is. And you see a lot of these reports that came in from certain individuals a lot of emphasis on animals and their knowledge of these animals. It's very interesting. So here she is. She's walking through the park. She turns around and she's facing an area that would be where they have the baseball diamonds. There's 4 baseball diamonds out there. They also have bright lights at that time going on, like stadium lights. There's 2 sets of them. And the field, by the way, was in disrepair. It looked like heck. And I actually have an aerial photo from satellite of the park that day showing that there were people out there playing baseball, having a good time earlier in the day. And I'm assuming many of them may have still hung around later because it was nice out. In fact, as she said, I gave my exercise. She had one of these treadmills. She gave the treadmill a break. Another person giving a break, because we have nice weather. We take the dog out, and we encounter some scary ass thing, 7 feet tall with wings sticking up out of its back, and she was so aghast by it that she was actually frozen in place and had to sit down and watched it as it alighted. This one didn't alight; it actually jetted into the air. And the funny thing is, the description reminded me of so many other things. First of all, the first encounter that Dorothy had, of course, was with the scarecrow. Now, when you think of some black, scary object, scary tall being jettisoning up into the air, I was introduced to the the horror movie, Jeepers Creeper. Are you aware of that movie at all?
Yeah.
The characteristics were very similar to that. And of course, Jeepers Creepers is what you would say if you didn't want to take Jesus Christ's name in vain and say, oh, Jesus Christ. You say Jeepers Creepers. And the funny thing is, in the movie of Jeepers Creepers, there is, in one of the series, where there is scarecrows being placed on a cross. There's 3. Did you ever see that? There were 3 crosses, and they were putting up the scarecrow. And the boy turns and he sees it, and it comes to life and gets him. Well, 3 crosses, of course, you're thinking resurrection, crucifixion, etc. Jeepers Creepers, it all falls in line. And the scarecrow, they're using a scarecrow. And what happens is, during this whole period of time, she gets frightened, and she's thinking, well, it could tear me from limb to limb. But then she says, oh, I wasn't really afraid, as I felt that maybe if I don't disturb it and provoke it, it won't hurt me. And maybe it's just like the geese migrating through. Imagine a bunch of these things migrating through. Now, this is an attorney, okay? And the first person she calls or sends a report to is this website instead of the police. And the reason why they sent it in is because they were so concerned about the well-being of people in the community and what may happen if they go to the park. So, and by the way, during this period of time, not far from there, was at 1543 Division, which would be south from there, at the Chopin Theater. They had it was the Wonderful and Terrible Wizard of Oz being played at 7:30. An interesting coincidence. Now, of course, L. Frank Baum, the creator of the Wizard of Oz, wrote the book, The Wizard of Oz, in, of all places, Chicago. And he lived in Humboldt Park. And I believe his address was like 1667 Humboldt Drive. And when he lived there, he actually named the Illinois Road after the street itself, as how the light would glisten off of it. So it was. It's a very interesting thing. There's far too much to go into with L. Frank Baum, but I'll introduce you to him, and the fact that that wasn't the only book that he wrote that year. There was another book that introduced another character, which was a dragon, which is also a drake, and that's very important. The first three reports that came in had automatic tie-ins with the Wizard of Oz. The next report we received was at a very large market, and it was a produce market where this gentleman comes in on his 2 o'clock shift, looks up and sees that there's this strange large owl looking creature on top of the roof. And in a matter of time, they start throwing rocks at it. Now, does that sound familiar at all? The throwing of rocks? Yes.
Like I think what you're referring to, Sam, is Faye DeWitt and her brother in their sighting at I think the North Power Plant, where they were throwing rocks at the Mothman creature that was on top of the building.
There was all these correlations, like with multiple other things, and there is always something having to do with the original Point Pleasant. The other thing is, on the day that happened, or the report came in, or where it took place, was on Easter Sunday. Now we have the resurrection, okay? The resurrection. Now, that first report in 2017 did not come to MUFON. It went to this other source. But that was the same individual and website that received the two prior ones that I mentioned in 2011. So here we have a scenario. One report comes to MUFON, two reports come to this other individual, and then in 2017, they get the first report. Then two more reports come in to us. That being the one with the owl, and or they were throwing rocks at it. The funny thing there is the individual's last name is one of the characters from The Wizard of Oz, which would have been the next one, or the last one that they would meet. The area that it's in, there are 77 areas within the city of Chicago. That area is called the Heart of Chicago, and it's district, and that area is known as number 31. There's just like gobs of things related to these underlying undertow of numbers and very unusual stuff.
I have a couple of questions.
Please.
Do we know what kind of IP addresses
Thank you.
these were coming from?
Yes. So of the first three, then we had one more event take place, and that took place in the Humboldt Park area. Again, you see the correlations there in the Humboldt Park area, where this gentleman on Easter Sundays with his son and his homies. By the way, nobody says homies anymore, at least not out there. That's weird. And all of a sudden, somebody scared it and it took off. But anyways, that individual's name also ties in with correlation with L. Frank Baum, and that has to do with the other character and creature, a drake. So I can't say the names, but you know what I'm saying. I'm going at. Now what we have is two reports coming in that short period of time. Then we had one more report that is supportive. That comes in a day earlier. There apparently took place on April the 15th. April the 16th was when those other two events took place, which was Easter Sunday. And that report came in from a teacher who was with her husband. Oh, by the way, what's interesting is they give descriptions of height. The one individual who I just mentioned at one location where they were throwing rocks at the owl, the massive owl, he was 6'2". Now, at this other, the next report, which was from a marina in Chicago, They were out on the lake. Mind you, they had small craft warnings. The wind was horrible. And they're out on the lake celebrating at around 9 something at night. And they're out 2 miles, mind you. And she sees through the moonlight that there's these large bat-like creatures, and she states that these are larger than a fox bat because she knows what that looks like. She's looked it up, and it was bigger than her husband, who was 6'4". Now, obviously, the way she was able to figure that out, her husband must have been flying, standing next to it, or maybe one of these things came down and they took a photograph. Who knows? But there's absolutely no way, first of all, that there was moonlight out because the moon wasn't up for approximately 2 more hours. And being on this would have been like one of the first days you'd get out on the lake. It was a nice day, but it was crazy. The weather, the lake was nuts, and it was extremely cold. You wouldn't survive long if you fell in the lake during that period of time. It seems so out of touch with reality. And apparently they said they took a photograph, but it was too dark. I don't care how dark it is. You attach it to your file and send it in. Meanwhile, to your point, the 3 reports that we received, 2 of them came from the same IP address, which is, what is it, one out of 8 billion to 1 or something like that. And it obviously tells you it's the same.
Same source.
Yeah, it's the same source, same router, not server necessarily. Now, those are the first 3, and I'll take some more questions and let Bill talk a little bit there.
Susie, you want to step in here?
I am a little bit. You mentioned my favorite movie, first of all, Jeepers Creepers. And then, we got into the symbolism and the numerology a bit. So Jeepers Creepers comes back, I believe it's every 23 years. Have you found connections with that number and these sightings at all?
23 years for 23 days. What does that equal?
So 23 plus 23 is 46,
Sounds
which
familiar.
is the amount of people who passed away in the Silver Bridge disaster.
Whoa.
It's also the same distance between bridges once the Silver Bridge collapsed. The 2 remaining bridges that were closest to Point Pleasant were Huntington and Pomeroy, 46 miles between the 2 of them also.
Okay, so now help me out here. At least some of these reports have a lot of problems with them. Buildings that aren't that tall, the weather is not right. Obviously, somebody's spinning a tale. And same IP address in some cases. However, what are we talking about? Coincidence, synchronicity? Are they? Are people creating this stuff to mirror elements of the Wizard of Oz? Are they that smart?
That's where the weird stuff jumps in, if I could.
Yeah.
Because Steve, what I'd like to do is share with you guys a little bit, with probably Jackie's help, especially about some of the things that we found in doing ghost box sessions, both in Thatcher Woods, which is close to where a lot of the sightings were reported in the Chicagoland area by O'Hare Airport, and how that connected to Parkersburg, West Virginia, and how that connected to the Tuende Way Park, which is right where the rivers come together in Point Pleasant. Can you talk about that?
You mean me?
Well, I mean, Jackie, can you talk to that?
Oh, okay, good.
Well, the first ghost box session was in Robinson Woods, which is said to be the most haunted woods in Illinois. And it's right near O'Hare Airport. And that's why it was done there, is because there were reports were coming in at O'Hare Airport. And there were several questions asked, but one of the questions was, what does 13 and 31 have to do with it? Because 13 and 31 keep popping up all over Chicago, all over Point Pleasant. And the response from was a place to go visit. So a friend of ours, and she got on the internet and was looking at, places in Point Pleasant that would be intersections of 13 and 31. and we took her to Point Pleasant with us, and Bill stayed back in Point Pleasant, but she and I went to up near Parkersburg. It's a suburb right outside of Parkersburg called Vienna, I believe is the name of it. And there was an intersection of 13 and 31. And it's just this little quiet neighborhood. And we were kind of, leery about, should we do a ghost box session here? I mean, it's the middle of the day. Do we want to sit around a corner in front of this shotgun style house and do this? And we decided, heck with it, we're doing it. So we did this ghost box session, and all kinds of strange things were coming up. We did actually an Estes session is how we did it. And my friend was wearing the headphones and the blindfold, and I was asking the questions, and I was getting stuff like a key or the key. I can't remember everything, but basically it was bones. It was the key or the keys, coffin, just like all kinds of like really strange things. And it said a park, and it talked about the park. And so right down the road a little bit from there was a park, and we went to that park, and we're like, we weren't getting anything. We didn't know what the park had to do with it. So we went back to Point Pleasant and, stopped and did a little sightseeing on the way. And we got back to Point Pleasant, and we found Bill, and we went to 2ND Way, and we're like, oh my God, a park. And it said something about Native American. And of course, Chief Cornstalk's 7 remaining bones are at 2ND Way Park with his obelisk there for him. And so we did a ghost box session there. And I'm not even sure what came from that ghost box session, but somehow we ended up going out to the TNT thinking we were going to do a ghost box session at the TNT. We're trying to contact Mothman. Mothman didn't come through, but we decided not to do it out at the TNT area, and we went to. We wanted to go to Charleston because of the bridge collapse down in Charleston. Sam asked us to go down there, and just look at the confluence of where the river was, where the bridge collapsed. And we went down there, and we did this ghost box session down in North Charleston. And it was the shortest ghost box session ever. And we were basically told to leave. And later on, when we were investigating.
Jackie, who told you to leave? The voices on the box or living people outside? Okay.
Yeah, the ghost box told us to leave. Well, what we asked is, should we leave? Because it was like a man, a lady, and it's all this stuff, watching, looking, and it's like there was a man and a woman that came out of this house, and they were walking around, and they were standing on their porch staring at us, and it's like she had no way of knowing these people were looking at us. She had a blindfold on, and she's just saying it, and then we felt like we were being pulled out from the top of our heads, from our crown chakra, and like really super lightheaded, and so we left, and we went and had lunch, which we planned on doing. And then we went back to Point Pleasant, and we completely forgot about everything else we wanted to do in Charleston. That totally wiped our mind, whatever it was. But what we found out later is where we were sitting at this church parking lot, there was a grassy area. And in that grassy area right beside the church was where a grade school was that Charles Manson locked the doors and burnt the school down, killing 2 children. It was his first criminal act, and he was like 10 or 12 years old. So, I mean, it just was leading us on this really weird adventure, and it seems like that's what the Mothman reports from Chicago have been doing, is like leading us to different places and different. There's such a weird underlying current that has to do with the whole thing. And it's like somehow Point Pleasant and Chicago Mothman are linked. And I don't think that the people that are doing the reports, especially the ones that seem like they're kind of made up, I don't think that they even have a clue what's going on. It's like the phenomena is now toying with everybody that's participating in it.
Let me throw something out here. There's a book called The Sareyton Mystery by Eileen Buck, and it deals with Arthur Bryant was a groundskeeper in England in an old folks home. And this is a few days after George Adamski died, the famous contactee that supposedly contacted the Venusian in the desert, California desert. He claimed a classic flying saucer landed 3 individuals stepped out, supposedly Venusians. The young one called himself Yamsky and was asking for Des Les. Well, Desmond Leslie was George Adamski's co-author. So the implication was that somehow Yamsky was the reincarnation of George Adamski, which is pretty quick to do it in a couple days and have a teenage Venusian or whatever. Now the thing is that there's other things that Bryant claimed. Obvious. There's a follow-up, kind of a pamphlet called Sequel to Saritan, and exposes a lot of nonsense. But at the same time, at the same time period, people are seeing strange lights in the skies. They're seeing UFOs. Voices are being imprinted on reel-to-reel tapes. Poltergeist phenomena. So you have this duality of total nonsense to something totally made up. But at the same time, I don't know if it's paranormal mimicry or whatever it is, but there's all this other bizarre stuff going on that seems to be some legitimate paranormal phenomena. So Sam, does that ring true with what you've been looking at? Sam, you're muted.
I can't even scratch the surface on this because there's just so much. And I hate to use the term rabbit holes, but the three things in particular, four things that lead you to is Native American scenario, Chichipequa in Illinois, of course, in Chicago area, Robinson Woods over there. He was one of the major, very influential in this area as far as the Potawatomi. And it's funny because one of the individuals that was working with the team here, when she was watching, oh, by the way, the Eyes of the Mothman came out in 2011, and that was played at the event at Mothman.
At the State Theater. I remember that.
Right. Remember that? Okay. At the State Theater. Now that's on what, 52 or 25? But
that's on Main Street.
On Main Street.
Route 62 yes. Parallels it.
62. Okay.
Right.
Now that's very important. Keep that in mind on the theater. And think of Eyes of the Mothman. Just came out in 2011. All right. It just came out on Netflix. So you have all these. You have the various. You have you have certain subsets of events that work like a mental equation, and then you draw a conclusion. Now you have the object in the sky that's automatically put up on the internet, and everybody thinks it's Mothman or some sort of cryptid something. Then all of a sudden you have there's these two girls screaming, and they have two red eyes peering through the window. Now, if you've seen the Eyes of the Mothman, the actual logo for it, all you see is black and white and the red eyes. Then you have, of course, this other creature from Oz, from Tasmania. So you put these all together and it comes up with something. It makes a mental equation. And all you have to do is create an environment like this, and other phenomena seems to fall into play. They cannot be that intelligent to place all these things in sequence. There's more, that it's much more unusual. And so you're answering in a question, basically, yes, that's the case in point. There is something here that is so unusual. I'm trying to think of where it rolls down into Humboldt Park. First of all, who was Alexander von Humboldt? He was one of the greatest adventurers, botanists, etc. More things are named after him. In fact, the Humboldt seals are in danger. Well, there's a correlation with his degree of looking and adventure. He was the most popular man at that time period. And of course, I had mentioned about Drake before, the name Drake, or the correlation with a dragon, a drake. In the book by L. Frank Baum. The funny thing is, do you remember the book Cosmos by any chance?
Sure.
And do you know who wrote that?
Sagan?
Carl Sagan was the second person to write that book. The first person to write Cosmos was Alexander von Humboldt, one of the most interesting people, and gave so much to this world as far as science. And the funny thing is, Sagan became involved with SETI through his relationship, of course, with Drake. And this is going to hit home with you because all this does combined. It's all about communication. What is communication? Communication is a transfer of information. Doesn't mean you have to know what's going on. It just needs to be transferred. What happened was I started looking into this, and then radar telescope research, green banks nearby, and all these things. In fact, the Elk River, we talked about the Elk River collapse, the bridge on December 15th. Was it 1904?
I think so, yes.
And of course, the Elk River flows into Kanawha, and both of them come to join at the point. And of course,
let's just stop for a minute and make sure people know that the Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15th, and as well as the Elk River Bridge on December 15th. The years don't seem to be significant, but I mean, you got 67 and 04, but truly bizarre that two bridges kind of connected in the same waterway collapsed on the same day of the year.
And
yeah, and
Steve,
the
that's
Kanawha.
what Jackie was talking about too when we were in Charleston. For folks who aren't familiar with topography or what have you, the geography of the area, Charleston is where the Elk River and the Kanawha come together. That's where the Elk River Bridge collapsed 63 or 4 years before the Point Pleasant Bridge did.
And they both the Ohio and the Kanawha, they merge, and at that point where, of course, on October the 31st, 1770, none other than George Washington stood there and said, "What a magnificent point, or a pleasant point," and that's where it got its name. You have two bodies, and we have two warriors that were thrown into the river, never found. Two bodies of orders converge. In Chicago, we have two bodies of orders converge, and they're actually shown on the flag with the stars. So there's Native American lore. Now, when I mention Eyes of the Mothman, when another partner of their group was watching the movie Eyes of the Mothman, a sequence comes up, and take a look at it when you have a chance, where they show the theater. And it just so happens Pipi or Chichi Piqua was born or died, I believe, on April the 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. And on a segment of the movie, the documentary, you'll see Main Street, and then you'll see the sign of the theater next to it to the right. And it says on there, April 22nd, Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Oz. And at that point, the individual threw whatever they were holding on the floor and ran out of the room. But that's an interesting little scenario that it's actually in the movie. Now, is there something else communicating with us throughout this whole thing? And we're just not even doing it even remotely justice by looking at this, but there is nonsense going on. So is it possible that even though nonsense is going on, much like you can put on a record player and listen to music, and it's not live music, but it creates the same effect, does the effect follow there afterwards? In other words, does a phenomena take place afterwards. And that was a concern that I had, that even though all this stuff was going on, and they didn't seem to be legitimate, a lot of it was just pure nonsense. And then, of course, there was genuine reports of misidentifications. The largest or the most common thing being blue herons. Tons of blue herons, great blue owls, or great horned owls. We also have long-eared owls out here too in Chicago. In fact, there was an infestation of them during that period of time. So you have these things going on. There's tons of correlations with numbers, events, and then my mind drew me to communication itself and trying to understand why are these names pulling together. You have Cosmos, you have Sagan, you have Drake, and it just got to be strange.
Hold on a second. Let me do our station identification here. You are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Today, Susie and I are speaking to Jackie, Bill, and Sam about the so-called Chicago Mothman and all the bizarre trappings that go with it. Sam, I had Andy and I had Allison Jornlin on a few years ago, and she did a lot of footwork, checking out dozens of these reports, finding problems with many of them. However, I believe she said that one or two of them seemed like they could have been legitimate. Now, do you, in your research, do you think that that some of these sightings, now this is a wide area over several years, I imagine that there could easily, I kind of ignored the whole area, because if there is a legitimate report, it's lost in the morass of all this nonsense. But do you think that there have been some reports that might represent a legitimate anomalous phenomenon?
I think I've spoken to 7 witnesses, and each of them were, I think, except for one, were being very genuine about what they saw, and was misidentification. Now, Ellison is a personal friend of mine, very, very good friend. And of course, she worked with us. We all worked together. And that's what we were trying to do, is get everybody to work together and find out what's going on. But that didn't, as you recall, didn't work out that way.
Right.
The thing is, there are certain, you could see like there's patterns. Now, we had the first 3 in 2011, and then you had what took place starting with Oz again, leaving with something referencing Tasmania, Australia, Oz. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you this. The third book, L. Frank Baum wrote, after his first book, 13 sequels to follow that up, but I didn't mention that. 13 sequels plus 1 is 14, and all of a sudden you're in Oz. And the third book that he wrote was Princess Ozma. Ozma was discovered, or Dorothy encounters Ozma when she takes a trip to, of all places, Australia, and they get lost. And it's that in itself, the correlations with other things, it's too much to cover in any 12-hour conversation. The thing with the radar, we have Drake, and we have Drake on April the 8th of 1960, starting the first experiments of trying to communicate to the cosmos. Okay. And he did that at, of all places, Green Bank, Virginia. And Green Bank, Virginia, of course, is next to the forested area there. What is that forest? But that's called the Mother of Rivers, where all these rivers flow and converge. And water has memory. There's very unique properties to water. And there's something with that. Anyways, as you may recall, in 1989, one of the unusual things that happened up there at Green Banks was, and this was during perfect weather, there wasn't any storms or nothing, late in the evening, on November the 15th, of all things, one of the huge radar telescopes actually collapsed, and it looked like Godzilla went there and just picked it up and ripped it all up. A gentleman who was in the bathroom at that time got all startled. He couldn't figure out what was going on. He comes out and he sees panels falling off the ceiling and really wasn't able to discern what was going on out there. He was really shooken up. But when NIST came out there, and it was NIST at that point. Prior to that, it was the National Bureau of Standards, and it was a mess. They couldn't figure out what transpired. He heard some unusual noises. It almost sounded like jets were chasing something. As you may recall, or you can find out, that during that period of time, there was also a lot of UFO activity. Now, mind you, we have the first attempt at what would be SETI in the long term of trying to communicate to the stars and also pick up signals. Now, that was November the 15th, same day as Roger Scarborough and the rest of them having their experience. But this is 22 years later. Who is to say that there isn't a correlation with that, and maybe they got an answer to something? And, it's just very freaky. And I found that all too interesting. The other thing was with Yancey, Carl Yancey, who actually discovered radar telescope. He was working for AT&T, trying to figure out why they were getting noise. There was 3 types of noise in the communication. So that was disturbing the message. And what had happened was he discovered that he was looking in a certain area of Sagittarius. And that area, he finally figured out that was where something was actually giving signals. And those signals were from the Sagittarius area. And that is a black hole. And that's what we've discovered from that. But there's far more into this. I'm like jumping around like very, very strange. But anyways, that's how I got into it. It's all about communication on this much higher level of freakiness. And we're not really giving it justice at this point. But anyways, what do you say, Bill? By no means. It's just too bizarre.
Well, I was just thinking in general. So I think we might have talked a little bit last time we were on about George Hansen and the trickster and the paranormal. But also I know that John Keel, as well as I believe it was Richard Haddam, stated in a documentary, Steve, that you were in. Hello there, kitty cat.
This is Keel, by the way.
Hi, Keel.
Right on, Keel.
Maggie's been harassing me. She was on my lap. That's why my video was off for a minute. But they talk about how once you get close to the phenomena does start toying with you. And when you're peering into the void is looking back at you. Keel talks about how this phenomena really is a co-creation between percipient and broadcaster, so to speak. So I can see how what's happened here in the Chicago area, this is how we got connected originally. Jackie and I attended a MUFON meeting 5 years ago. We met Sam and we immediately talked about, the sightings in Chicago, and he had expressed that he was the lead investigator on that whole alleged flap. But I can see how things could take off and really kind of become their own phenomenon. If this undercurrent that we're talking about, the transposition of 13s, 31s, what Jackie talked about with the ghost box sessions, taking us from location to location to location. There was even somebody, if I remember correctly, didn't one of the ghost box sessions point us down to Alton?
Yeah, when we did the Thatcher Woods one, I had an idea of having 2 people on the spirit box, so we called it the Thatcher session instead of the Esty session. And Bill and then our friend was doing the headphones and the blindfolds, and they were on different frequencies, and I was asking the questions, and they were literally answering, each other's. I mean, like I would ask the question and one of them would say something, the other one would finish the statement. It was so wild. But we were trying to find a mini serpent mound, and so I was asking questions regarding that. And one of them said, I said, who am I talking to? Who is the one giving me this information? This is what we want, blah, blah, blah. And someone said Bonnie. And I said, Bonnie, do you have a last name? And the other person said Bland. And then something came up talking about 77 and like all this other different stuff. And so afterwards, when we were investigating, there was a woman named Bonnie Bland who was from 77 years old, who was from Alton, Illinois. And she knew the Lowe family that had the little boy that was picked up and carried off back in 54 or whatever year that was. I don't even remember. But what I thought was also funny about that one was the family's last name was Lowe, just like the Lowe Hotel in Point Pleasant. And so there's just like all these really strange synchronicities. There's one other thing too that I want to say just real quickly before I don't get a chance. Faye DeWitt has talked about her sighting of the Mothman for years and years and years on all kinds of documentaries. And there's been all kinds of like different drawings and people have tried to, draw it out for her and everything. And it wasn't until maybe 5 years or so ago that she had a police artist draw her rendition of what she saw as a child of the Point Pleasant Mothman. And that was done and it was painted, and it's a beautiful piece of art, and it's at the Mothman Museum. And I about died when I saw it and I literally took a picture of it and sent it to Sam because it looks like one of the monkeys from The Wizard of Oz, one of the flying monkeys. It seriously does. And it's like, never once did I ever put that together with anything Faye ever said. So it's like somehow even I feel like Faye's been pulled into the Wizard of Oz scenario of all of this crazy Chicago stuff.
Well, I wasn't aware of all the bizarre connections, that whether they're coincidence or some kind of synchronicity. But Bill brought up a good point, the trickster aspect. And without going deeply into it, Keel experienced it with the silent contactees. They thought they were in contact with these other intelligences that sometimes gave them predictions that came true, and sometimes were just messing with them. In a book I've mentioned several times called Hungry Ghosts by Joe Fisher is where he was talking to supposedly dead people through these mediums. And he went to England and Greece to try and verify the information. He found out some of it was dead on accurate and a lot of it was nonsense. So you get this crazy mix of some things that are legit and some things that are not. So Sam, where does this leave us? I mean, Alison Jornlin was viciously attacked because she was questioning some of these sightings, which was really unfortunate. And
So was I.
yeah, you were too, huh? Boy, well, it's too bad because if and Susy has too. She has gone out there and questioned some of the dogma, I guess, that's out there, some of the bizarre claims, and this is crazy. I did not expect this. I did not.
I can make it a little bit crazier, I think, Steve.
Okay, please do.
I wasn't expecting this conversation to go this way, but so my story, Steve, but to fill everyone else in, a few years ago, I started having reoccurring dreams, or they were nightmares actually, about my great grandmother, who I'd never met, died before I was born. At the time, I originally thought it was, my great grandmother was mad at me about something, trying to communicate. I no longer feel that way. And now I feel like it was something trying to make me think it was my great grandmother, to get me to go on wild goose chases. Jackie, when you were talking about your ghost box sessions, I was like, that's exactly, how I felt. I was being, pushed from one location to another, and nothing was ever clear or communicated. It was just like, what the heck's going on? But throughout this, I did find out that essentially, my ancestors were responsible for King Philip's War, and more precisely, the incident that led to what people now call the Wampum Belt Curse, which they think is, what caused the Bridgewater Triangle. But when Sam was talking, I realized there is a Wizard of Oz connection there. The nightmare that I had, it's, this older woman with two farm hands, and the woman's yelling at me, and then the farm hands grab me. And I always said, it's like Auntie M and the two guys in the beginning of The Wizard of Oz. I don't have a Mothman connection unless you count Steve. But I certainly have, can relate to this in a way I didn't expect to.
I imagine you don't have any ruby slippers either.
Yeah, and in the book, they're actually silver. The funny thing is, I never read the book, and every time the movie was on, I ignored it unless I had to watch it. Fantasy, I'm more I was like the guy that watched the National Geographic shows, the nature shows. Science and history are things that I absolutely love. Ufology came to me from my own experience. It found me. I didn't find it. And this whole journey involving these cases and these rabbit holes, or I just call them journeys, have brought me to understand things that I never would have known before, meet people and love them very much, that I never would have known or come in contact with. And each one has taught me something. And my sister always said, and my wife, I'm like a little computer. I have to get more information all the time, stick it in my head. But to your point, is there something actually there? There is this phenomena. Is there something that is cryptic? Well, possibly. I have friends that, and I've worked on cases that may have been cryptid. Things like Sasquatch and whatever. There may be things. I spoke to one gentleman who's, he says that he's seen something as big as a deer fly up in the air on Route 294 when he was on I-294. And that was considered the first sighting, and it's touted as being the first sighting. Yet nobody spoke to him. They spoke to his ex-wife, or actually didn't even speak to him. They read it. Now, keep in mind, I have been out there. Ellis has been out there. I've spoke to 7 individuals. I received these reports originally. And by the way, we received quite a few. And we still get things now and then. But again, anything that falls outside what may not be ufological has to be done outside of MUFON. And that is exactly how I've handled this. We've done it in a team effort. And that's the only way it should be approached. I don't think we should, take into consideration everything as being as it is, because there are these trickster elements, and there is the human trickster element. Now, the other thing that came into my mind during this period of time was AI. Is it possible that a very unusual attempt at seeing how much information could be accepted through social media and on the internet, and controlling these elements even to such a level as low as this? I think it's impossible even for AI. There were 4 more cases that came in, by the way, in that 2017 that we received, and I investigated directly. None of those individuals, by the way, none of the reports that we received, except for the first one, and I believe 2 other ones, had anything legitimate as far as contact information. They all had various patterns of fictitious emails, phone numbers, and fictitious names. So there was really nothing to go on. And my assistant state director was in charge of the CMS, and I asked him, How many times have you ever seen reports come in like this? Now, mind you, he had seen anywhere between 8 to 10,000 reports a year. Overview, over as far as the oversight before they go out to the state directors of the countries. So he says, I've never seen anything like this. We had 77% of the reports come in pertaining to this subject that were fictitious and obviously nonsense. And over the last 4 that we received, 3 of them came from the same IP address. So how absurd is that? And then people come down me that, this isn't correct, that no, maybe somebody just used their bandwidth or something. No, that's totally impossible. It's nonsense. And then we also did style metrics, the study of the way people write, the use of words, grammar, etc. And we could find, and Bill and Jackie could agree, that it's consistent in many of these reports, all too many.
I know that there are some people that suggest that the Point Pleasant Mothman or the Ohio Valley Mothman somehow migrated to Chicago. Now, let me tell you, my Mothman did not go to Chicago. But seriously, are there of all the reports that you've looked at, do any of them mirror the broad spectrum of the Mothman prophecies? Were people having outbreaks of poltergeist phenomena after they had their sighting? Were they going in trances or missing time? What about animal mutilations? What about Men in Black visits? Are there anything that would carry over from the chronicles of what Keel chronicled in the Mothman prophecies to the Chicago area?
There really, let me answer that, Sam. There really is not, Steve. And that's one of the things that I fixated on early on, being a student really of the whole Mothman legend and the flap of 66 and 67. I looked for that. I wanted that to be part of what was going on in Chicago. We live 60 miles west of Chicago. We can be there in an hour. It was, when we first heard about this, we were really excited about it, but none of the high strangeness elements have been reported at all. I think once the folks who were really reporting on this and publishing books about this and doing what they were doing with it got wind of the fact that high strangeness was not an element of the first 10 years of sightings. After that, some of the reports that came in were even more sensationalized. They talked about having a sense of dread, seeing the black winged creature with the piercing red eyes. The reports began to mirror more and more aspects of Point Pleasant, but I think it had to be pointed out that wasn't happening before. So none of the poltergeist activity, none of the Men in Black activity, although Sam has had a very strange Men in Black thing that perhaps you could elaborate on that a little bit, Sam, now that I'm thinking about this, that individual that really mirrors the Barney Hill reference that's, I think, in the Gray Barker book about...
Is that Dr. Hopkins?
I think so, yeah.
In Maine? Okay.
We'll let Sam tell that part of the story because it's his story, not mine.
There were 3 witnesses that contacted both myself and this other and the key other person involved on the other side. And this gentleman was a truck driver, and he had a sighting while sitting in his truck, and he felt it was more like a UFO. And what he had seen was that it had the reverse scalloping along what appeared to be wings, but he thought it was mechanical, not living. So he contacted this other individual, and he sent me an email. I contacted him the next day. We got together, and it was probably a month and a half since we had actually gotten together. And we got together at an overpass that was actually knocked down recently, over 294. I got there early because I had to eat some darn thing. Boys, I got to feed. The boys got to eat. He's looking a little thin, So I went and I had a piece of pizza, sat down, and there was this tall guy comes walking, and he had an envelope. And he's looking and he looks at me and he goes, "Are you the doctor?" I go, I go, "No, why, are you hurt or anything?" He goes, "No, no, no, I'm looking for a doctor. I have a coin here that I'm supposed to sell to him." I go, "Oh, really?" So he sits down, we start talking. I ask him a little bit. It just so happens for the first year of his high school, we went to school together at the same high school. I went to a preparatory seminary, and I can't recall the guy. And then he's working at a jailhouse as I forgot what the position it was, and I knew a lot of the people not in there, but handling the place because I used to be in politics. And it was just so weird. And we started talking about stuff, and I go, "What is your background?" And he says, "Well, I was in the military. My last I retired as a captain, and I was working at the Pentagon." And I'm like, "Wow, this is getting interesting." Meanwhile, I'm waiting for this guy to show up. And Billy, I could use his name. He's known. And I'm waiting for Billy to show up. And I says, "By the way," or he says, "By the way, we'd like to see the coin." He takes the coin out, and it is a 17, I believe it was 1787 uh, Fugio, I fly, Fugio, Fugio. It was actually designed by Benjamin Franklin. And what it has on there, on one side is the sun and the sundial, which has the gnomon on there, the Masonic symbol, of course, prominent in the center. And then you flip it over and look at it, and you'll see the rings, the 13 rings, and we are one. 13 rings, and we are one. And then I flipped it back over again, and he says, "Do you read on the bottom what it says?" It says, "Mind your business." Now, we would say mind your own business today, but the past, during that period of time, you would say mind your business. And he just smiled at me. Meanwhile, the doctor comes in, they make their transaction. I gave him a piece of paper. I'm I'm freaking out because it was so weird. I fly, and then mind your own business, 13 rings, and then all of a sudden, Billy and his brother show up. Both these guys are very well built, and his brother looks like the Illustrated Man. He had so many tattoos, but two of the tattoos stood out immediately. He had a pyramid with the all-seeing eye and a flying saucer coming out of it. So these guys were really into all sorts of stuff, and then they were talking to me. But he had a sighting, and what Billy's known for is the fact that there was a medical condition, and here he found out that the medical condition took place after his sighting, not beforehand. So much got read into it, far more than what the reality was. But the weird part is here I had this instance before, and if you ever see the coin, take a peek at it. You'll know what I mean. I had my hair standing up, and there was a guy sitting off to the side watching us and just smiling at me. And he was dressed up like like somebody that's definitely not supposed to be there, and all too sharp looking. And he just kept smiling, and it was weird because he watched me for the whole time. And there was another person watching me too, and I'm like, "What the hell is all this about?" I was very uneasy about the whole situation, and got back into the car and made it home, and here I still am. But there were a lot of strange occurrences during that time, rippling of unusual stuff. August the 4th was the first photograph that came in, and I think Ellison addressed that because she went to the location, so did Jack. And the person, and again, this is one of those ones of out of the four. One of them is a dead person that filled out a report. That's very interesting. And the other three were from the same IP, and this was one of those from the same IP. We were taking a break and going up to Wisconsin, and for our anniversary, just going to spend a day up there. So we rented. We were at a hotel. Man, was that cruddy! But I got a call, And this guy calls me and he starts talking about, he says, I'm out here in towards Vegas, and I'm a truck driver, and I'm here in Vegas, and there's this Indian in the room, and there's this alien, and there's, I'm like, what's this guy even talking about? And when I looked at the name, I actually knew who the person was, and I scared him by telling him everything about him. Oh, by the way, his father worked for Air America. Does that sound familiar? So I could get an idea of where this guy was coming from. But anyways, the first photo comes in, and of course, that was an airplane. It wasn't anything more than that. What the hell are we talking about? I got off talking about a bunch of stuff.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's try and make sense of something that makes no sense. We have a situation where it's apparent that many of these original sightings and maybe some of the later ones were bogus. There's a lot of nonsense. However, there does seem to be a lot of weird synchronicities. Now, I'm willing to believe that we can go down a road where we see coincidences and put things together, but it is simply coincidence. So some of this could just be that. But knowing, as I know, that people, like I gave the Sarita mystery example, where people create a hoax and there seems like something mushrooms around them, and I don't know why. So is that what's going on here? Did this start out as something bogus, and then perhaps something like something Keelian has grown from this? The trickster, the paranormal mimicry, that sort of thing. So what do you think, Susie?
I'm not. I went into this with a preconceived notion of what happened, and now I'm just not sure. Because I had, like, much like you, I had just kind of written it off, saying maybe there was a couple that were legitimate. Now I'm not sure, but it does kind of seem more like a collective unconscious thing, and there definitely is more to it than I originally thought, for sure, to say the least.
Yeah, I think some of these there may be something there, but that, again, it can't be validated. The other thing is, in those instances where we have genuine reports, we can usually identify what it is. I should say almost 9 times out of 10. It's like with UFO reports. 9 times out of 10, we can pretty much figure out what it is. And it's that residual factor that there are some out there that seem really peculiar, and by people of pretty good stature, even in this scenario, that there may be something really worthwhile there. I don't know. I can't write everything off, but again, does the phenomena spring or grow from an agitation, even if it's done so? In other words, you kick it around a little bit and fake it. It'll still give you the same effect.
I remember John Keel saying that he would entertain notions, theories, even wild theories about what this was, and then he would start receiving reports from people all over the country supporting that belief system, like the reflective factor. Very strange. Now, Sam, I got to ask you here. This is a little bit off subject, but I got to ask you about Tinley Park. One of my favorite episodes of UFO Hunters, where these giant triangles went over that part of Illinois. What was that like? That investigation like?
Well, we got the 20-year anniversary coming up, August 21st. It was a fantastic investigation because, first of all, for the first time, I had volumes of video evidence to take a peek at. And we had literally hundreds of witnesses. We have different vantage points. We have things here that you don't get. That's why I like to work on mass sightings. This I thought was going to be something like a mass sighting, but It's different. Now, even when we draw the correlations between something like that, Tinley Park, we had, these unusual lights appearing in the sky, no air traffic. Mind you, now, you know what Chicago's like, no air traffic on August 21st, which was a beautiful day. It was the Air and Water Show was going on. It was the last day. There were literally over 2 million people downtown, and they were coming back home. The sighting started about, say, 10 o'clock in the afternoon or in the evening. And what they had seen were these 3 illuminations in the sky, very unusual red. And if it got closer, you could see it. It isn't consistent of red. It's a full myriad of colors, but they're moving around so quick. But it appears there were other substructures or superstructures on this thing. And we wouldn't be able to discern it unless it was close enough or you were far enough away and you had the, say, for instance, the light from the city shining up and you could see the edge. No air traffic for 2 hours. The object came in. Another one came in afterwards. It was seen in multiple countries. It was filmed also it was videoed down in Australia. It was Melbourne. Very good case and very well investigated. There were 2 of them down there. But this isn't the only instance that we had things happen in Tinley Park. We had it again, of course, on Halloween. Same scenario, except we had more objects. We had a horseshoe-shaped object with a boom and a round, I don't even know what you'd call it, object on top of it. Then we had the orange orbs, which my wife and I had actually seen. And these objects, the orange orb, picture at arm's length something the size of maybe as big as a quarter to a half a dollar. Julie says at least a half a dollar. Sitting in the sky. We had 13-mile-an-hour winds headed from the north, and oozing from the bottom were smaller versions of these, the same coloration orbs, but smaller ones coming out. And when it came in, it looked like an explosion of static. There was all these static charges, these bright flashes all over. And it sat in the sky. It sat in the sky perfectly still, total as if you were to paint it there, and a 13-mile-an-hour wind. And then it moved across. And when it moved across, it changed color through the whole spectrum of the rainbow. And we watched it disappear over to the southwest. And that actually was west-southwest. And my eyes didn't blink during that whole period because I wanted to see everything. I called the police department and I told them, I asked them if any reports came in, and they laughed. The same guy called me back just before 12 o'clock and said, Mr. Maranto, what you saw was children with balloons. And the way he said it, Steve, the way he said it, I wish I had it recorded. He gets close to the phone and goes, what you saw was children with balloons. And I'm like, who told you to tell me that? And he goes, and he gets real close to the phone and goes, I can't tell you. My neighbor was a volunteer for the police department in Orland. And he said that night there was a lot of strange things happening. Individuals coming in, removing records, and they weren't from any known, put it that way, agency, and they shouldn't have done anything like that, but they did.
That's what I was going to ask. Was there any official response? Well, I guess that was it, a cover-up.
Yeah, and the same thing with the mass sighting on the 28th. They had no explanation. And then on the 31st, I filed a FOIA for radar data, and I'm trying to stay on top of it, called down to Area 5, called down to Dallas. And the girl down in Dallas said, Sam, you know darn well if it was a UFO and it was recorded on there, we got anything, you're not going to get it. Then I called back up here and they said, well, it just so happens your time ran out, and it just so happens the person who was supposed to be working on it is on maternity leave. And I'm like, oh, great. But the O'Hare case, well, at least we did get some data on that, and that was a very good case.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I like to wrap up the show, but let's everybody chime in with some words of wisdom, something that will live in infamy, something that people will quote in the future. So, Jackie, would you start by saying something very profound? What do you think about this, Jack? How does this leave you? Dumbfounded.
But it also kind of, it makes me excited because I get drawn in so easily. I just wish I had more time in my life to really do some really deep digging, because I find it all to be very, very fascinating. And the more I learn about things, the more I investigate things, the more I realize I don't know anything, and that nothing can be discluded from any of it, because it all somehow links. When Sam said 77%, it's like 77 is another one of those numbers that keeps popping up in this. And 77% of the reports, it's like 77% of the reporting. It's like, so I mean, it leaves me very fascinated.
Susie?
Mine is more of a question than a profound statement, but we've, spoken to other people who have found weird coincidences with the Wizard of Oz specifically, and I would just like to know, what is it about the Wizard of Oz?
Well, the Wizard of Oz, as evaluated of how many thousands of top movies, is the number one influential movie in the world of all times. It is number one influential. And it also has been taken a seat. It has formulated an image of fantasy, of illusion, of unusual interactions with creatures that are not in this realm. You're taken to another realm of reality, and be it consciousness or literally another realm of reality. I don't know. The thing is, it hits home on many bases, especially within the intelligence community, big time. So in that realm, it has other connotations, but you could get an idea where that goes to. That's ours. So it has a lot to do with illusions, manufacturing things, creating something that becomes a keyless phenomena. Wouldn't you say that, Bill?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if I could, Steve, my thought would be how 10, 12 years ago, when I was really digging into my research, Mothman, John Keel, all these different topics that are related to that, I was kind of the right-brained kind of woo-woo guy who was really into all the weirdness. And Jackie was working as a postmaster, which requires a lot of analytical skill. And somewhere in our relationship and the way that we go about collecting information now, I've become the more analytical one with processes of what we do for our research. And she, because of her experiences and just because of who she is, more in the right brain space, more of the relational side. And ultimately, I think that what we like to do is to try to help people all in all in really understanding what they've been through, to identify with maybe some of the challenges. And if I could use the word trauma, and to use that trauma really as a springboard to get to different places in life that they never even knew were possible in the past. So this whole Chicago thing here, I mean, it brought Jackie and Sam and I together, and it got the five of us talking about this here, and we never would have known each other without it. So regardless of whether it started as a genuine research project or turned into something that was not legitimate at all, whatever the case is, there's a strange undercurrent. We've connected some dots, and there's some really fascinating stuff going on. But ultimately, for me, it's the human stories that are the most interesting. And how do you reach those people? How do you help those people? How do you help them develop?
And I'd like to add something that's going to anger some people out there if they happen to listen to this. Allison Jornlin contacted me prior to a Mothman festival, and she wanted to know if she could speak. And everything was filled up. So I talked to Jeff Wansley. He said, well, she can speak at 3 on Sunday. It'd be the last one. And so I told her, and she said that would be fine. And it was great because while a lot of people go home on Sunday, she had a great crowd there in the theater. And of course, Allison always does a phenomenal job. So I just want some people out there to know that I was the conduit that got Allison Jornlin to speak at the Mothman Festival.
All
Yes.
right.
And Sam, is there anything you'd like to say to kind of wind things up?
I'll tell you the experience. It's so big. There's so, like I said, we're not even scratching the surface on it, and there's so much more that has to do with communication. And Bill really nailed it, and Jackie. There's something, an undercurrent here that we can't ignore, and I think it brings us all together instead of looking at our differences and fighting and arguing. I'll tell you what, I would have never met Allison and Scott and Mike, her brother, and all these guys were my friends, and Jack, and I could just give you a whole, even the people that caused issues, I find merit to, and I respect regardless and love them regardless. That's just the way I am. All I could say is the experience is beautiful. I've learned so much about people that are just ignored today in history, and I see a common thread through all this, and it has to do with adventure and exploration, and enjoying and celebrating our differences, but more so the difference of this world. Thank God it's multiple and so strange. What a boring place it would be without it.
Well, I don't think any of us are bored with the things that we follow. Okay, hey Sam, how can people contact you? Where can people find you?
Well, as a general rule, you could just give me an email at MUFONSAM1, MUFONSAM1, number 1 at gmail.com. And anything pertaining to other than more so the nuts and bolts scenario. By the way, I'm pretty rigid and dogged in my research. If as Bill and Jackie know. So to get into this mode of consideration took a lot of work, but when it hits you in the face, it's there. And but in the same token, I do prefer things being more scientific. And I'd say what happens is we have other elements of what they refer to as paranormal. All it is just not normal, but not understood. And like Jackie was stating, and we need to pay attention to these things. There's something else here, and I think it's worthy of further investigation.
Bill and Jackie, you'll want people to know where they can contact you if they have something to contribute to your new book.
Our email address is prpconnect@outlook.com, or they can go to our website, which is prpconnect.org. And at the bottom, there's a contact button, and that'll send them the email also.
Excellent. And Susy, maybe we should briefly mention the Paranormal Book Club that you started with Andy Mercer and I as co-hosts.
Absolutely. And our first guest happened to be Bill.
That's right.
Yep. So you can find us there on YouTube on Paranormal Book Club, and there's also a Facebook group, Paranormal Book Club. Our first book was The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel.
And they dragged me kicking and screaming to do that book, Our next book is we're working on right now is the Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm going to do our closeout. And listen, this has been a really fantastic couple hours. And like Susy, I was ready to go down a different path. And Sam, you really messed me up, pal. I'm just telling you. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
The High Strangeness Factor was created by Steve Ward and Andy Mercer and is copyrighted on the Paranormal UK radio network. I want to thank our fearless leaders, Irene Allen Block, Mark Johnson, and Andy Mercer. Andy also is producer and composer of the end theme for the show, Brian Zeller for the opening theme. I can also be heard on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files as a correspondent weekly, and if you listen to all the shows, from time to time, you will also hear Susie and Andy on Mac's show. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Michigander, deep in the Ohio Valley, inches from downtown Point Pleasant, living on the same road, the one, the true, the authentic, genuine Mothman once chased automobiles in the mid-60s. Thank you all for listening. Andy, Susie, and I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.